Hi guys, I'm Deb Watson, and this video will show you the basics for how to scrape rocks in watercolor. First, I'll cover scraping basics with this, and then we'll give you a preview of next week's lesson, when I'm going to be scraping a lot of different things in an entire landscape. First, you need a scraper. I'm taking an old card and I'm cutting it so that I have a lot of different sizes and shapes to scrape with. You can buy scrapers at the art supply stores online, or you can use any flat, firm object, like a razor blade, a credit card, a palette knife. Good colors for rocks and trees are Cobalt or Ultramarine Blue and Burnt Sienna or brown. Most people think of rocks and trees as being all brown, but there's a lot of blue in there. So in this case, I'm starting with blue, and generally you want to get a fair amount of thick paint on your paper, and then you push down with your scraper and continue pushing down while you pull across. This roughs up the surface of the paper, and it will give you a rock-like texture. I'm switching to my razor blade because I didn't feel like I was doing a very good job with that scraper. The razor blade is a little firmer, and what this does is it's pushing the paint down to the bottom to make it a little darker. Scraped rocks aren't going to look great immediately. Here I'm just adding a little bit more shading and shadows at the bottom. And you can scrape or paint or scratch in some darker crevices or lines in your rocks also. Since these rocks will be in the water, I'm kind of softening up the edge with a clean, damp brush. And I always like to have 3 of something. So this time I'm going to put in a brown rock. It's a lot more brown in here. And this is my old driver's license that I cut up. I used this in the last video. And that gives me a whole different look. So try some different scrapers and find one you like. I dried the rock so far, and now I'm going to add some water. I put some really dark water around the rocks, and I kind of round the bottom out a little bit. I'm working wet enough that these colors can kind of mix a bit on the paper. I'm using some dark blues and browns. And then it will get lighter as it comes down, so I switch back to some of the cobalt and stuff I used for the initial rocks. Here's the lighter shade. And see, you can see the bottom of the rocks extending into the water. That's a nice effect. I start to fill in the top, and then I think it'd probably look better with some foliage. So I mix some yellow in with my blue to make kind of a green. I add more yellow. This is my small paintbrush. I stuck the back end in a pencil sharpener so that I have a nice point. And I'm using this to scratch in some grasses. I filled the small brush with clean water and I'm tapping it on my finger to spatter in clean water to give some texture to the background. Scraping gives you light colored rocks, and once it's dry, you can go back and add more dark if you'd like. You can change the color of something by putting a wash over it, or turn one rock into several by putting a dark shadow around the area you want to come forward. I'd like a little more grass, so I go over my scraping, and the finishing touch for rocks in water is to add a line of white around the bottom of the rock. You don't need to do a straight line or make the outline go entirely around the bottom. It often looks nicer if you break it up. Scraping will give you good rocks. You just have to find a scraper that works for you and practice. Next, we're going to use scraping for this landscape. I'm basing the landscape on this photo from Pixabay, but I'm using a lot of artistic license. You notice I'm back to the blue and brown, and because the mountain is far away, I'm using fairly watery paint to start with at the top, and then I get a little thicker paint. Here's some Cobalt Blue and burnt sienna. You notice I don't mix them on my palette. I just dip my brush in one or the other and let them mix on the paper. You'll get much nicer rocks if you do this. This side's all brown, so I add some blue to the bottom. This is really wet and juicy. And then I'm starting with the scraper we cut. I'm looking at the reference photo, and I'm kind of trying to go in the direction that I see the rocks in the photo. Keep in mind that scraping never looks great in the beginning. Just do the best you can and keep going. So that's the back part, kind of like that. Here's the front part. And I'm going to stop there. Next week's video will show you exactly how to paint this landscape with scraping trees and rocks. Last week's video was scraping birch trees, so you can use scraping for a lot of different things. Happy painting!